I heard it before I saw it. That ugly crunch of rubber chewing gravel, that impatient horn like a dare. And I stepped out onto the porch in my socks with my coffee steaming in the morning chill, thinking maybe a delivery truck got lost again. But no, it was a silver Range Rover eating up the curve of my driveway like it belonged there. The kid at the wheel wearing a varsity jacket and the expression teenagers reserve for adults. They think can't possibly stop them. And he didn't slow down, didn't nod, didn't do anything except track a neat line past my garage, swing dangerously close to my dog, and blast out the other side through a gate I never built. A gate that looked exactly like the kind of thing our homeowners association would order from a catalog. Assemble wrong, and then defend to the death. Another car followed 30 seconds later, then another, a stuttering parade of entitlement. And there I stood with my coffee going cold in my hand, and the feeling that I was watching my piece get rewritten without my consent. Like waking up to find someone moved the walls of your house while you slept and left a note saying, "You'll love the new flow." 3 days before all this, the world had still made sense. My wife Emily and I had picked this corner lot place precisely because the driveway curved away from the neighborhood like a private thought, tucked behind hedges and a couple of old maples that dropped leaves like confetti in the fall. And the quiet was everything to me. I work from home as a systems engineer, and I spend my days coaxing patterns from noise. So silence is not a luxury. It's oxygen. And for a long time it felt like we'd found a pocket of our own. A bubble where the neighborhood existed politely on the other side of the hedges. And then I started noticing the tracks. Dark ribbons near the shrubs. And I told myself it was the mail truck turning around, or a neighbor's kid practicing parallel parking. But on the third day, a wooden stake appeared at the edge of my lawn with a paper sign stapled to it, like a diagnosis. Community flow access, temporary routing, approved by HOA. The words were friendly enough, printed in the kind of font you'd use for bake sales. But the message was a crowbar to the ribs, and I looked around half expecting a hidden camera crew to jump out and yell, "Gotcha!" Except nobody came because nobody needed to. Because this, apparently, was the plan. I walked the sign down to the HOA office, a converted model home that smelled perpetually like lemon cleaner and committee meetings, and asked to speak with whoever had the time, the audacity, and the printer ink to authorize a detour across land that wasn't theirs. And that's how I met her. Claudia, president by title, monarch by temperament, posture like she'd never once carried a grocery bag in from the car, voice like a commercial for a perfume you're not rich enough to understand. And she greeted me as if I were the misunderstanding. "Oh, you must be from the corner house," she said, smile as precise as a warning label. "We've implemented a temporary flow solution during construction on West Cedar. It's only for a few weeks. Your driveway is beautifully accessible." "It's mine," I said, still trying for light, still hoping there was a rational path through this. "And temporary flow is not a law, it's a phrase you invented. You can't route the neighborhood through my property." She tapped her tablet, still smiling. "Technically because your parcel is adjacent to the community boundary. It falls into a soft access zone if the board approves it. Let's be neighborly while we navigate construction." "Show me the statute," I said. "The ordinance, the case law, any sentence in any book that says soft access zone and means I just lost my driveway." She told me she'd be happy to at next month's meeting, which would be after the project was done, and the habit set in and the story had already started telling itself without me. I went home and told Emily what happened, and she listened the way she always does, eyes steady, hands wrapped around her mug like a small anchor, and she said, "We'll handle it. But this is going to get loud before it gets quiet." And she was right. Because the next morning I walked out to find a temporary gate at the back corner where our hedges used to be, reflective cones winking like smug little lighthouses, and a fresh ribbon of cheap gravel scabbed across the grass into my concrete. And the sign they'd posted, cheery and precise, said "Exit only, please drive slow," as if the only thing left for me to do was manage their traffic. That evening I called my cousin Nate, who is the kind of lawyer that keeps his law library in the garage between a drill press and an old canoe. And I told him everything, and he said, document it all. Every plate, every tire track, every email, don't touch their gate yet. Let them think they've mapped you into a corner. And we'll count the inches they took and hand them the bill. And there was relief in having someone say the ground under my feet was still mine. But morning came and 7 SUVs rolled through in a slow, confident train. And one of them honked at my trash bin like the bin owed him money. And a woman in a minivan paused long enough to ask if I'd move my mailbox just a couple feet so she could swing wider without scraping her paint. And I smiled because my grandfather taught me that a smile is the safest way to show your teeth. My neighbor Tom drifted over around sunset, hands in his pockets, eyes on the hedges like maybe they could still grow back if we didn't look directly at the wound. And he said, I probably shouldn't say anything, but Claudia is pushing to make it permanent. She's calling your driveway an emergency route. They're talking easement. She's got 2 signatures already and she only needs 3 more. And I stood there feeling the shape of fury settle into me like armor. Because they weren't asking anymore. They were drafting my land into their map. And I can take a lot of things, but redefinition without consent is not one of them. Here's what the HOA didn't know. In a previous life, I designed mechanical deterrents for logistics yards. Not sexy projects, not the kinds of things you brag about at parties, but useful and safe and very good at reminding vehicles where they belong. And I don't like being dared. And I don't like being told by people with clipboards that my boundaries are subject to a vote. And while I wasn't planning to become the villain in a neighborhood legend, I also wasn't planning to get run over in my own driveway. But before I could even pivot from planning to action, the HOA pushed again, like they thought momentum was a law, like forward motion would eventually make them right. I heard the saws before I saw the vests. 4 men chewing through my wooden fence with the casual energy of people cutting a ribbon at an opening. And I came running. No shoes, no plan. Just the kind of velocity you find when your name is being rubbed off your own property. And I asked if they had a permit, and the man with the saw said, Claudia approved it. It's community land, adjacent. And the word adjacent had never sounded more like mine in the wrong mouth. And I called the police, and the officer was kind but tired, and explained that unless I could prove criminal intent, this was likely civil. And I said, power tools cutting through a fence is not a vibe. It's an intent. And he sighed and said, I have to follow orders too. The emergency HOA meeting that week was a play with a foregone ending. Folding chairs, a projector, a snack table with cookies that had seen better afternoons. And I brought a poster board with parcel lines and a thumb drive with footage. And Claudia sat at the head table like she'd commissioned the room and opened with a slide deck titled Temporary Easement Proposal, Parcel 90C, which is my parcel, which is my name in code. And I raised my hand and she told me the board would hear comments after the vote. And they voted 3-2 to allow operational flexibility, which is not a law, not a right. Just a set of words that people use when they don't want to say no to themselves. I stepped outside into the dark and called Nate, and he said, she just blessed your case on the record. Breathe, gather, we play long. And I went home and pulled a spiral notebook from a drawer and began outlining something I hadn't planned on ever building again. Not in a residential life, not within view of my own kitchen window. And I won't give you measurements or schematics because that's not the point, and it's not responsible. But I will tell you there is a difference between malice and boundary. There is a difference between a weapon and a lock. And what I designed lived squarely on the side of keep out with a sign planted firmly in you. Were warned. I had a load of industrial gravel delivered. The kind that looks innocent in photographs and sounds like a bag of knives when you drive over it. And I dumped it across the middle stretch of the drive where the freeloaders had learned to straighten their steering wheels. And then beneath that new surface, I set a deterrent system I'd prototyped years ago, concealed under a panel that matched the drive, passive until it wasn't. And I tested it in safe, controlled increments. And when I was satisfied, it did exactly what it was designed to do when triggered, and absolutely nothing when not. I brushed the gravel smooth again, posted a sign at the entrance that said, Private property, Proceed at your own risk. Simple as a handshake, clear as a promise. The first vehicle to ignore the sign was Claudia's white Mercedes, which felt narratively on the nose, but sometimes life chooses the obvious line and trusts you'll respect the timing. And I watched from the porch with my dog pressed warm against my calf as she rolled down the curve like it had her name on it. 3 cars behind her, a small motorcade of followers, and she rode right to the center, right where the drive used to feel like a runway. And I triggered the system and heard the soft hiss of consequence, and then the theatrical sigh of air, leaving a tire faster than a lie can travel. And her SUV lurched, ground its pride across the gravel, and came to rest with a surprised sort of dignity. She stepped out in heels that hadn't met gravel before. Hair perfect, temper hotter than her front left rim, and she pointed at the ground like it had insulted her and shouted, "You sabotaged the road." And I said, "Driveway, private, not a road." And she said, "There are spikes in there." And I said, "There's a boundary in there." And she told me I'd be hearing from the HOA, and I told her she'd be hearing from my lawyer. And while we stood there, 2 of the cars behind her reversed down the curve like videotape, and one driver in a pickup gave me a small, apologetic wave that felt like the first crack in a wall. The letter arrived the next morning, formal and indignant, endangering community members, creating hazards, refusing to cooperate. And Nate sent one back with receipts, timestamps, photos, sworn statements, a freeze frame of Claudia's Mercedes easing past the sign. And then a county inspector named John showed up in a city sedan and reflective sunglasses, and he walked the line of the property with me, looked at the plat map and the assessor's site and the footage, asked smart questions, took slower notes, and finally said they have no authority to designate what they did not build and do not own. And he dropped his voice and said he'd dealt with this HOA before, when Claudia tried to reimagine a neighbor's yard as a meditation platform for the community and filed paperwork so creative it should have come with a disclaimer. It should have ended there, but it didn't. Because power doesn't retire quietly. It pivots, it mutates, it tries the back door. And when I reviewed my exterior cameras that night, I saw shadows at 12:41 a.m. Dark clothes, no vests, bolt cutters glinting when the porch light sensed a spider. And I watched them snip the caution tape I'd put up after the Mercedes incident. And I watched them fiddle with the rear gate lock. And I watched one of them lift a phone and take pictures of my garage keypad. And when I paused the frame and zoomed, it was Todd, Claudia's nephew, the HOA's tech coordinator. And the cold that runs along a spine when someone tries your house like a handle is a very specific cold. Nate wanted to go nuclear, but suggested we aim first. So we packaged the footage and the documents and the sign photos and the letter trail, and we waited for the next HOA meeting. We let them announce a community conversation about temporary access rights, and we arrived 15 minutes late with a thumb drive and a patience that had learned the art of spectacle. And when public comment opened, Nate asked to use the projector, and Claudia said the projector was for board business only. And the room murmured because nothing slaps harder than a forbidden screen. And the inspector John, bless him, had also come. And he stood in the back like a witness. And he cleared his throat and said, "I'd like to see the residents' materials." And suddenly the projector became very public indeed. You could hear the room lean forward when the night vision footage played. The silvered bodies moving across the edge of my yard like badly written ghosts. The bolt cutters in one hand, the phone in the other. The lock resisting for a second and then giving up with a click, and someone said, "That's Todd," not quietly. And someone else said, "We pay him." And when the clip ended, Nate clicked to a still frame of Claudia's newsletter proposing my driveway as an emergency egress option with a highlighted path like a neon lie. And then I walked to the table at the front and set down an envelope and told Claudia to open it. And she pulled out a deed and read the parcel number, and went still because the triangle of scrubland behind my fence, the one she'd used as her rhetorical runway, now belonged to me. Purchased months ago at a county auction, because sometimes you look at a map and see the hinge on which a future might swing. A board member named Lila, who always looked like she'd rather be gardening than governing, raised her hand and said, "Madam President, I move for an independent review of these actions." and another member seconded, and the room voted its exhaustion. And Claudia left the meeting early, her heels sparking tiny arguments against the tile floor. And over the next few days, the traffic disappeared like it had dreamed itself in, and was embarrassed to be seen in daylight. And my driveway exhaled. It could have ended there, and if this were a gentle story, it would. But 2 weeks later, a newsletter arrived thicker than usual. Glossy paper that felt like someone raided a print budget, and inside was an emergency access ordinance proposal, with a map that again highlighted my driveway. Only this time the legend implied county collaboration, and I drove that packet straight to the county office with Nate, and we put it on John's desk and watched him read and then laugh. Not unkindly, more like a man who's seen the same mistake written in different fonts for 20 years. And he said, "This is not just wrong, this is radioactive." And he scheduled a full board attendance for the next meeting. The clubhouse that night was standing room only. The pool chairs dragged in, the air conditioning giving up the ghost. And Claudia came dressed like a TED Talk, blazer crisp, chin set, a wireless mic clipped to the lapel like a medal. And she gave a speech about safety and unity, and how a community must be nimble in an uncertain world, and how access is the key to resilience. And then she pulled a cord and dropped a banner that said, "Pathways to Harmony," with an aerial map of the neighborhood and my driveway glowing neon green like a runway to reason. And before the applause she wanted could start, John raised a hand and walked to the front, and said into the room's old microphone that the ordinance violated multiple sections of civil code, that the map misrepresented county endorsement, that the board had been presented with footage of unauthorized access and tampering at night, and that an audit of the HOA's governance and finances was being opened effective immediately. Silence. That thick, interesting kind. And then Lila again, voice steady now. "I move for a vote of no confidence in President Claudia's leadership." Another second, hands up everywhere, and Claudia looked like a person trying to bargain with gravity. And then, because sometimes the universe can't resist participating, the door opened and a tow truck driver in a dusty cap poked his head in and asked if Claudia was present because he had an order to repossess a vehicle registered to the association for reasons of misallocated funds, and nobody laughed, not out loud anyway. But the room made a sound like pressure leaving a can, and Claudia left without her blazer looking as crisp as when she arrived. The resignation email hit the next morning. Lots of adjectives, few apologies. A sentence about how real leaders are punished for their vision. And the board followed with a letter to me, acknowledging my absolute right to deny access, promising to repair the damage they'd sanctioned, and offering to reimburse legal fees if the audit found wrongdoing tied to the actions we documented. And I printed that letter and had it notarized, and hung it in my workshop between photos of us moving into the house and an old certificate from a project I'm still proud of. We threw a barbecue at the end of the drive the following weekend, because there's a stage where relief wants to be communal, and I hung a banner that said "Shortcut closed, party open," and neighbors I only knew from car windows stopped and introduced themselves with casserole dishes and folding chairs in that particular neighbor tone that says, "We've all been living under the same weather, haven't we?" And Tom brought a microbrew he swears he didn't make in his bathtub. And even John from the county swung by, and we stood around the grill while the evening slid down the curve of the sky, and Max made friends with a corgi in a bow tie, and everybody took a turn telling a story about the time the HOA decided to expand the full definition of common, and we all decided to contract it back when the last folding chair scraped back toward the pool house and the string lights hummed in the dusk. Emily and I sat on the porch with the kind of tired that tastes like earned sleep, and the gravel in the middle stretch gleamed a little under the moon. Not menacing, not boastful, just present, like armor you set down after a fight, but keep within reach because you learned something about the world and yourself. And we didn't talk for a while. We just listened to our street be what it was supposed to be again. Quiet, ordinary, not part of anybody's plan. And I realized my anger had cooled into something steadier and more useful, into a line I could explain without shouting. A few days later, I ran into Tom by the mailbox, and he asked if I thought Claudia would try a comeback. And I said I doubt it. Not here, not now. Not with an audit and a memory as fresh as new pavement. But people like that don't disappear. They move until they find a board that mistakes confidence for competence. And he nodded and said he hoped the next neighborhood listens quicker than we did. And I said maybe that's the point of a story. Not to punish a villain forever, but to remind everyone else where the edges are. I've gone over it in my head. For anyone wondering if I regret anything. And no, I don't regret defending my home. I don't regret documenting. I don't regret insisting that no is a complete sentence when it comes to your property line. And I don't regret a sign that says exactly what it means. And if you're hearing this and thinking I should have let it slide for the sake of peace, I get that instinct, I do. But peace that requires you to vanish from your own map isn't peace. It's surrender dressed in polite clothes. There were moments I could have been kinder. I could have tried one more conversation before the meeting. I could have found softer words when I was bone-tired and angry. But this is the part we don't talk about enough. How a community that punishes firm boundaries breeds more boundary violations. How people with clipboards who never met a real limit in their lives go looking for your limit because they can't find their own. And if there's any wisdom here, it's that you should make your no visible. Not theatrical, not cruel, just present. Like a speed bump on a road that isn't yours to drive. If you're wondering whether the spike system stayed, what I'll say is the gravel stayed and the warning stayed. And the habit broke, and that was the point. Not to win a war, not to run anyone off, but to make crossing my line expensive enough that people remembered what it felt like to be guests in a world they didn't build. And you'd be amazed how fast courtesy returns when there's no shortcut through someone else's quiet. I've told this like a story because that's how it happened to me. Not in bullet points, but in weather. Long, steady stretches of sunny calm interrupted by a week of storms. And at the end of it, I'm still the same guy in the same socks with the same coffee stepping onto the same porch to listen to the day. But something in me is older and less interested in negotiation when the first offer is theft masked as efficiency. And that has bled into other parts of my life in good ways. I say no quicker to meetings that could have been an email. I say yes louder to dinners with Emily on the back steps. I check on Tom when I haven't seen him in a while because community is not a board. It's a set of people who take turns remembering the others exist. So now tell me, if that had been your driveway, your dog, your sleep, your map, what would you have done? Would you have played nice and hoped they got bored? Would you have caved for temporary flow and discovered how permanent it loves to be? Or would you have drawn a line like I did and accepted that some people will call that line rude? I want to hear it because stories like this live differently in every neighborhood. And maybe your version has an ending I haven't considered. Drop your take in the comments. Argue with me if you need to. Tell me where you think the boundary should be. Because we talk a lot about community and not enough about consent. And maybe the only way to get both is to say clearly and early, this is mine. That is yours. And we can be good neighbors as long as neither of us forgets which is which.